You know what is absolutely crazy to me? If you wanted a large family hauling SUV throughout most of the 20th century, you had one option, the Suburban. And I just don't understand this, because throughout the 60s and 70s and even in the 40s and 50s, right? General Motors and Ford and Chrysler to a large extent fought it tooth and nail across every single segment. You had the Mustang, you had the Camaro, right? You had the Blazer, you had the Bronco, but the Suburban was pretty much left alone. Well, that's not entirely true. International had the Travel-All, and Travel-Alls are great, but they rust out faster than a tin can on the Titanic. It's just what they do. But Ford didn't have an answer to the Suburban for decades and decades and decades. And when they finally came out with an answer, it was the Expedition, which was great. But Ford doesn't do anything small. Ford has to go to the extreme with pretty much everything they did. And the answer to this Suburban was a little bit overkill, the Excursion. And in this video, we're gonna find out which one is better. Now this is a really cool Suburban because this is a Suburban 2500, and just like the trucks, you got the 1500, the half tons, and then the 2500, the 3/4 tons. And the 2500 was the top dog Suburban for a lot of years. This one is a 1996, and well, Ford's answer to the 1500 was the Expedition. Their answer to the 2500 was a battleship. Now the 1500 and the 2500 Suburbans, they look pretty much identical. I've got one right over your shoulder, Cole, which is 1500, it's a 98 or something, but it looks the same to most folks as a 2500. Well, when Ford revealed the Excursion, they said, let's not make this look like an Expedition, let's make this look like an oil tanker. And so they based it off of the newly introduced Super Duty. Brendan, thank you for bringing out your GMC today.
Yeah,
very regal sounding horn, would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
Listen to this horn. That's a, excuse me sir, please get out of my way. Now this does ride surprisingly well. So we are on this kind of rutted out gravel road, and look how smooth it is.
Yeah, I'm not even getting any jitters or anything like that here. It's pretty nice.
Now I will say that compared to the Ford, this is a much lower, believe it or not, driving experience. But the ride is much better. It's got a much kind of smoother way it handles the bumps. The steering is a little heavier than you'd expect compared to like a 1500, because the 1500 has this interesting power steering design that the 2500 was a little bit different. But if you had like a ranch, imagine how perfect this would be.
Oh yeah.
You know, you gotta like tow around your horses.
I could see that.
Perfect for that kind of thing. Let's see how the power is. So this is the 7.4 liter V8. We'll give it a little squirt coming up the hill. Wow, look at that.
Oh, man, it just powers right through it.
This thing is awesome. So you're selling this here pretty quickly, Brendan.
I am.
And I am really interested to see what it will go for, because I have this theory that these are going to be the next hot collectible vehicles, because they are still relatively affordable.
Yeah, I mean, if you see some of the other off-roader vehicles or towing vehicles on the market, you know, like the Toyota Land Cruiser, for example, those things have shot up like crazy.
Yes.
But these are still pretty reasonable. You know, you can get them in the low teens for a really nice one, and you can even get them sometimes down into like the $9,000 range for one that's a little higher miles.
Now, I think this was a little interesting, right? Because most of them you see, and you do shop around for them, right? But yeah, a lot of them are 1500s.
Absolutely,
so,
yeah. You see those everywhere.
The 2500s are kind of a rarity.
Absolutely.
Partly because I think they sold less of them, partly because a lot of them were used up, but then also I think because a lot of people just hold on to them, you know? I mean, it's very rare that people actually sell these.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at the auctions, I do see a decent amount of those 1500s.
Yeah.
But I've never seen a 2500 at an auction before. So I just don't think people are trading them in, and I just don't think a lot of them exist anymore.
And even private party, they're getting very rare. And one like this one where it still has paint on it,
yeah,
kind of unusual.
Right.
Now, of course, these two never really competed, because this is a 2000 and that's a 96. This Excursion would have competed with the next generation of Suburban, the GMT 800. I unfortunately don't have an 800 series Suburban, but you know, it's 2022. It's been like 28 years. You guys are just gonna have to get over it, and we're gonna find out if you have like $10,000, $12,000, $14,000 should you get yourself a used Excursion, or should you get yourself an old Suburban 2500? Well, let's talk about the engines. Now, this Suburban has the 7.4 liter Vortec V8 in it. Makes 290 horsepower. How they squeeze just 290 horsepower out of a 7.4 liter? Well, it kind of hurts your brain in 2022, but this was a towing engine built for longevity. Over 400 pound-feet of torque. So pretty good torque numbers. Well, as you'd expect out of a big block V8. Now in this generation, you could also get it with the 6.5 liter turbo diesel. Those are especially rare. And then in the next generation after this, they had the 8.1 liter V8. All of these are very strong engines. They are old school, very simple fuel injection compared to modern day technology, and they last an insanely long time. Insanely long time. Like, it's not uncommon to see these with 3, 4, even 500,000 miles on them. So this is an early Excursion. They built them from model year 2000 to like the mid 2000s, and a few different engines available. So at the base end of the spectrum, you had the 5.4 liter Triton V8, which almost no one bought because you're powering a vehicle the size of Nebraska with like 200 and something horsepower. Now this is the next engine up from that. This is the 6.8 liter Triton V10. So over 300 horsepower, over 400 pound-feet of torque. This would have competed with like the 8.1 liter Suburban. It's a good engine. This was like an industrial-based engine. 310 horsepower out of 10 cylinders, but the idea was it was very low compression, very kind of lumpy, just put along doing its thing for a lot of miles. Now these had a notorious issue where every now and then they would shoot a spark plug into space. That was a pretty unfortunate issue. But here's kind of where the two really separate, right? Because Suburbans you could get with diesel engines, like in this generation you had that 6.5 liter turbo diesel. But Excursions are really known for their diesels, and that's where people love these vehicles. So 7.3 liter Power Stroke diesel, or the 6 liter in the later ones. 6 liters, yeah, okay, they're 6 liters. They do bomb every now and then, but if you bomb-proof them, they're very, very good. And Excursions with diesels are probably some of the most loved vehicles on the internet and just in general. There's a reason that an Excursion with a diesel will often go for $50,000, $60,000 in 2022. And that really is what made these so special, and that's what they're known for. Now, with the V10 and then the V8 gassers, they're still very competent, potent trucks. They're just not as loved because I feel like 90% of the draw of these things is that insane power stroke. Good engines last a long time for the most part, but the diesel is where it's at with the Excursion. Whereas with the Suburban, it's less about the engine, more about kind of the design, the axles, and the longevity. Now this is a fully independent front suspension design. Still a big, beefy axle design, 8 lugs, right? But I think GM switched to the solid front axle in like 1988 when this series of vehicle came out. And that really does have a big impact on the driving, which we'll talk about here in a second. But let's look at what Ford did. Now Ford decided to stick with the solid axle design, which was what the Super Duty used in the early 2000s. It's actually what the Super Duty still uses all the way in 2022. But very different ride quality. So solid axle in the front, 8 lug design, solid axle in the rear, once again an enormous axle, but a much more primitive suspension system. And this also, believe it or not, uses leaf springs, which has a pretty major impact on the ride and handling dynamics. Even though this is a slightly older generation truck than the Ford, GMC 800s have a fairly similar interior if you go into like the early 2000s, but I think General Motors did a much better job on the interior than Ford. The quality of materials, the fit and finish, the number of rattles certainly is better in a lot of these older General Motors products than I think Ford, and I'm just going to say that across the board, General Motors has a nicer interior. Now, of course, this one is an SLT, so we've got these big, comfy, loungy captain's chairs with some funny features like this little fold-up notepad. They were big on notes back in the day. You've got the little bottle launchers here, at least this one's the bottle launcher. That's always going to eject whatever you have into the passenger's crotch. And speaking of crotch vents, classic, iconic, very legendary. Now, push button 4-wheel drive in this model. So 2 high, 4 high, 4 low, all via these little push buttons. All right, let's go ahead and hop on the running boards of the Suburban and check out the back seats. Pretty good back seats. One thing I don't like is that your knees end up kind of sticking pretty high in this vehicle, which I always thought was a little bit odd. And then, thank you for all the comments. I now know that this little slot is a tissue holder. It's gonna have to be a tiny little thing of tissue, so that's like a one sneeze tissue holder right there. But let's check out the third row. Now these seats do fold in kind of a funky way. As I think we pointed out in the last video, you lift up the seat bottom just like this, and then you can fold and tumble. There's also an easy entry system. But let's check out row number 3 in the back of the GMC. And, all right, it's pretty good. Pretty good. I mean, yeah, I'm going with pretty good. Headroom's a little bit compromised actually, which is kind of interesting for the size of the vehicle. But good legroom, and once again, knees do end up sticking pretty high. A couple of cup holders back here. But this is really where the Ford is going to shine, because having a triple XL SUV means you have triple XL back seats. Now, don't get me wrong, this is still a very functional interior. This is an XLT. If you got a limited, you'd have like the finest fake wood from the finest plastic trees and, you know, the big leather seats, whatever. My issue with this thing is that Ford just didn't do a very good interior back in the early 2000s, or actually the late 90s for that matter in a lot of the vehicles. It just, aesthetically, quality-wise, I don't know. Now, they do last a long time. So, unlike the Rams, right, like the dashes are pretty good. And these vehicles both have very similar mileage, both about 170K. And they both have been, I think, quite well maintained over the years. So nothing is really, like, broken. But everything feels like it's straight out of a porta potty, or like a Fisher-Price aisle at Toys R Us, or like a McDonald's Happy Meal. It's just like everything's crummy. Nothing feels very good on the interior of the Ford, and I hate to say it. The shifter, the steering wheel looks like it's from an Econoline van, because it is from an Econoline van. Now, of course, this was a vehicle meant to carry a lot of people and tow horses, and I get that the interior thing was not its jam, and I know people are going to say, oh, you're just used to lariats of today with leather and touchscreens. I'm all about basic interiors. Give me like a 1965 Ford interior, I'm going to be the happiest camper anywhere, because like the old Ford interiors were very mechanical. Everything felt very high quality, but when you got to like the early 2000s, things just feel like they're gonna fall off in your hand. It's not a very good place to spend time. The Excursion has what I would call a Marxist seat setup, where everything is equal. So they wanted the same amount of seat room in the front and the second row as they get in the third row. Bet you hadn't heard that one from your latest Car and Driver review. But open up the door handle through these lettered door, Super Duty style handles, and then when you hop into the second row, you're kind of surprised that there's not more room for a vehicle this large. It's decent, and your knees are maybe a little lower than the Suburban, but not that much lower. But really where things get crazy is the third row. Now the seat does fold in a similar way to that Chevy, or you can also do an easy access system where you push this and then the whole thing slides like that. But the third row is where, well, this is why you buy an Excursion, because it's got a much better third row than even that Suburban. I've got more headroom. I've got a ton of legroom. I swear to God, you have as much legroom in the third row as you have in the second row, and as you have in the first row practically. You can really stretch out back here. This Suburban, GMC by the way, because they had both Chevy and GMC Suburbans back in the day, has the barn doors, which I think are fantastic. They work really well. And look, hang on, I got to do this little dance. They hadn't quite figured out the whole assisted shock thing back in the day. But check out the room behind the third row. Huge amounts of room. And then, of course, your spare tire in your spare tire condom. The reason these are in the back, actually, and thank you to the comments who pointed this out, but these had an enormous fuel tank, like 42 gallons, and they couldn't fit the tire underneath with the fuel tank. So that's why it's back here. But look at the space. Third row comes out. But this is nothing when you compare it to the Excursion. You see, the Excursion is some 7 inches longer than the Suburban, and you really see that when you open up the rear end using this kind of interesting split tailgate system. Now, unfortunately, we have put larger tires on this vehicle, and the carpet condom doesn't fit anymore. I don't know, maybe there's like an XL version of that, but look at the space! It's huge! And that really is where, once again, the Suburban shines. Lots of space back here, lots of towing, like 10,000 pounds of towing capacity with these things, even with the slightly underpowered V10. But yeah, if you want space for the money, Excursion is about as good as you can get. It still, I think, is one of the largest factory SUVs ever. Even a new Suburban is smaller than this Excursion. It's that big. Now, welcome to my Excursion.
Yeah.
The battleship. Now, the first thing you notice, right, you sit a lot taller in this.
Yeah, and you seem a little further away from me as well.
Everything's a little further away in an Excursion.
Yeah, it sure
That is 100% true. Yeah, the dials from your face, the people in the back, the boat behind you, it's just all a little bit further.
Yeah.
This takes a very specific type of person, because this is a vehicle that has never been replicated and probably never will be replicated, let's be honest, with the move to EVs.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's unfortunate. I mean, you have to think that some of the manufacturers will look at the used market and what people are paying for the diesel versions of these and go, wouldn't they pay that for a new one?
Right. Now, you will notice that the ride is a lot more choppy.
Oh, yeah.
This has got a solid front axle. The advantage, though, is if you are one of those folks that want to put a 6-inch lift and 44s on an Excursion, it's a lot easier to do than the Chevy. I also like the look of these a lot. I think they look very cool. But going up this really steep hill here, we're going to demonstrate the downside of the V10, and that's that it just like, that's all she's got.
Wow.
You know? Crazy, right?
Yeah, kind of expected a little bit more with it having an extra 2 cylinders.
10 cylinders! It's like a Gallardo. 0 to 60, I think officially was like 12 seconds or 11.9. So it was not a speed machine.
Yeah.
And on the plus side, though, you did get like 6 miles to the gallon. So. But no, I understand why people like these, especially with the diesels, because they're just over the top. Like the Suburban's a little bit reasonable. You can make an argument to your spouse or your significant other that, you know what, we need the Suburban. Nobody needs an Excursion, right? This is a hard one to justify. Like, oh well, what if we have 9 kids and we need to tow a 40-foot long boat? Like, it's just never going to happen. But that is part of the reason that these are so valuable. And in fact, like we were talking about a good Suburban, probably low teens.
Yeah.
A desirable one of these will be 30.
Holy cow.
40, 50, so kind of a different price point too.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, dude, thank you for coming by.
Hey, my pleasure.
This was a lot of fun. Really appreciate it. We're going to have Brendan on the channel a lot more because he's got a lot more cool stuff in the pipeline. When it comes to the battle of the full-size double XL SUV, who wins, the GMC 2500 or the Ford Monstrosity? Well, I think the GMC, especially this one, is it's a little bit more comfy, so it's got a better ride. I do love the 7.4 liter V8. I like it more than the Triton V10. I like the interior on these more, and they just feel really good. Plus, they last a really long time. Now, the Ford, on the other hand, I think is a better looking SUV overall. I do like the overall front end design with the headlights a little bit more than the GM trucks. You gotta love the space, and the capability is insane, but the engine is a little underwhelming for the size of it, and the interior is a little bit underwhelming as well. Really, if you're gonna get an Excursion, there's only one way to do it. You gotta get the diesels. The diesels, the V8 turbo diesels, are what made these things special. But if you're looking at gasser versus gasser, this is the one I would take. I really like the big block V8. I really like the 4L80 transmission with the independent front suspension driveline. This would be my choice between these two. Bring in a diesel, well, you're gonna up the price by like 3x. It's gonna get a lot more fun, and then the story might change. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. A big thank you to Brendan for bringing this over. And if you're interested in this particular Suburban, it's going up for sale very soon. I'll post a link in the description below. We'll see you on the next TFL Classics video.